Thank you, everybody, for making it tonight. I just wanted to give you maybe a 10-mile-high overview of what compelled me to bring this event together, what inspired me with VLab to help get this here. So this is the overview. Why should you care about access to justice? Access to justice is the issue where we have in this country hundreds of, 100 million civil cases, and in those civil cases, half of the people are not represented. So that number is at least half. That number is in somewhere to 80 and upwards million. I show you the 90 there because 90 indicates that 90% of the law firms in the United States are 1 to 4 lawyer shops. These lawyers are not connecting with those clients, and that justice gap affects everyone in here because 75% of the cases that are in before the court generally have a very low value, maybe $5,000. So your significant contract matter or your divorce or your adoption is being pushed back because there's an overwhelming amount of unqualified users or uneducated users of the justice system, and it's causing a lot of backlog. As a result of that, action is being taken. There's a business opportunity. I mentioned the 100 million cases. They've estimated 40 billion on the outside of the market. You've noticed with law, there is no market leader. There is no household name. I do believe there's an opportunity for an H&R Block-like company to come in for law. A 6,000-year-old industry is about to radically change. I want to tell you a brief story. 25 years ago when I was going through undergrad, I was a smog mechanic. I worked on cars and I accessed their computer. By accessing their computer, I had to rely on another piece of equipment, which was a $100,000 computer that allowed me to interface with that computer. That computer on the vehicle was responsible for that little check engine light we all know. The check engine light comes on in your car, you're thinking, crap, how much is that going to cost? Recently, my Sprinter van threw a check engine light, and I was a mechanic. Well, I didn't have a $100,000 machine to reset that light. I walked into Walmart, and for $100, I bought a machine that could do what that $100,000 machine did before. Lawyers are at this critical influx. The legal industry has not changed primarily in its existence, but we're finally to the point that the lawyer is very similar to that $100,000 machine. The lawyers now can take their knowledge and they can digitize it. And once digitized, it can be replicated, it can be served over and over again. So opening the legal services market to more competition will serve important objectives, including access to justice, the public interest, the rule of law, and administration of the courts. That motivated the state of Utah, and California is watching it, to open a regulatory sandbox to allow creative solutions to the justice gap, which includes the relaxing of the rules of professional conduct, which we'll go into it more this evening. But this is a greenfield investment. This is the first time ever this industry is being open to outside investment. And I know generally speaking, professional services are not the target for capital, but in this instance, law is a slightly different professional service because it's something that can be digitized. You can't digitize a dentist putting his hand into your mouth, but you can certainly take expert knowledge from the lawyer's brain and put it into the machine. There's a great panel. Drew, take it away. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Jason, thank you, Nathan, and thank you all of VLab for putting on this event. I really do think this is an exciting time in the legal industry. There really are a lot of changes afoot. Jason alluded to them with some of the regulatory changes that we're looking at. I also wanted to thank the VLab organizers, as a baseball fan, for choosing the off night in the World Series for putting this on. And for all you lawyers in the audience, I met several of you outside. The question tonight is, will AI kill lawyers? It's a good question. Things could be worse for you, though. You could be a baseball umpire, where AI is really, really coming to the fore. When you look at the strike zones as they're broadcasting these games, and now some minor league actually use robot umpires to call balls and strikes. At least we're not there yet in the legal field, but who knows what'll happen. So the topic tonight is, will AI kill lawyers? I think that's a little bit sensational. I don't think we're gonna go quite that far, but when I heard that, it made me think of another inflection point in world history, and that's the Industrial Revolution and the classic American tale of John Henry. So I'm sure you guys all know this, but John Henry, the steel driving man, worked on the railroads, had his giant hammer, hammered holes in rock mountains. They'd put explosives in, it would blow up. He'd have a tunnel that the railroad could go through. Then along came the steam engine. and you had a steam drill. And John Henry took pride in his work and challenged the steam drill to a battle. And they went all night and all day, and you know the end result. John Henry won, yes, but to some price. John Henry won the battle, but he was fatigued, he got sick, and he died. I don't know of any lawyers who have died from AI entering the field yet. Hopefully that's not going to happen. But lawyers have already been challenged by AI. This spring, Vice Media, on their HBO show, put this to the test. There was an episode where they took a lawyer, guy who went to UVA law school, top 10 law school, worked at an international law firm, and they put him up against a startup company, Logikcull. And they gave each of them 2 non-disclosure agreements. And they set them to work to see how many issues they could pick up in those NDAs. Well, the lawyer, a guy named Tunji Williams, took him about an hour to get through it. And they scored him, he had about 85% accuracy on it. For Logikcull, they put their software on it. It finished its task in under a minute. And the result was about 95%. So you can see in that example that there are efficiencies to be made here in AI. As we're getting going, I kind of want to get a sense of the audience. Can you raise your hand if you're a lawyer? How many lawyers do we have out here? So it looks like about half the audience. How many folks work in AI? Maybe the other half. How many, anybody left over? A few, all right. So I'm glad to say that Tunji didn't die from that, but it might have killed his career as a lawyer. He saw the writing on the wall, and Tunji is now an entrepreneur. He started a legal tech company. So AI is going to bring new opportunities as it is changing the legal field. And we're seeing that in the last 3 years. There's been an explosion in the funding that is going into legal tech companies. In 2017, the number was about $236 million. In 2018, it went to over $1 billion. And again, this year, we're at about $1.2 billion with a couple months left to go. Now, not all of that is going into AI. And in fact, in 2018, the best number I could find was about 300 million went in, so less than a third. But there definitely is interest picking up in this area, and we're gonna talk about that some more this evening. So the last thing I wanted to get into is, what does AI look like in legal? You know, a bunch of people here are working in AI, and as we think about AI in everyday life, we see self-driving cars, we see the robot umps, we see Amazon somehow knowing what I want to buy before I do. We see in the medical field, dermatology. I was talking to my wife last night about this event. She's a dermatologist, and a couple years ago, there was a study out of Stanford where they used a neural network which looked at potential skin cancers on the skin and was able to achieve the same success rate in determining which ones were malignant cancers as board-certified dermatologists. So all fields are changing. What does that look like in law? Well, there are several different use cases. One of the oldest is document review and e-discovery, and one of our panelists tonight represents that field. We have legal research companies like Ross Intelligence and Casetext. We have contract analysis, the Logikcull example, companies that go through your contracts and pull out discrepancies. We have blockchain and smart contracts and predictive analytics. There are companies that are looking at what judges have done in the past and predicting what your success rate will be in litigation going forward. And finally, we have expertise automation. How do we automate some of the workflow that lawyers have been doing? And with that, I want to turn it over to our startup panelist, Amelie.
Hi, thanks so much for having me here. This is really exciting. I love talking about formally. There's another slide of all of us. All right, so formally, we are a legal tech startup and we simplify immigration forms. And why do we do that? Because USCIS receives about 6 million applications every year, but there are a lot of more people being displaced, and there's a growing trend towards people moving around in the world. What a lot of people don't know about immigration is that the very first step, if you're an asylum seeker in the United States, is a form called the I-589, the Application for Asylum and Withholding of Removal. It's a great name, but let's take a look at this form. What does it look like? So it's about 12 pages long, 400 fields, and if we just look at the very first page, actually, let's look at the very first question on the first page. It asks us to check this box if you also want to apply for withholding of removal under the Convention Against Torture. Do any of you have any idea what that means? Pretty hard question to answer. And these forms are only available in English. Let's see if it gets better. Next question asks you for your alien registration number, your US Social Security number, and your USCIS online account number, none of which you would likely have if you're applying for asylum. So, what can you do? Who's going to help you out? Well, luckily, there's some really cool lawyers and also some NGOs who do amazing work in the fields and who are trying to help people through this paperwork. But unfortunately, they're pretty overworked, and they don't speak all the languages necessary to supply good translations for everyone, and they're also lacking funding a lot of the time. And all of these problems together mean that 86% of asylum seekers don't have legal representation right now, which makes them about 5 times more likely to be denied. I know I only have 3 minutes, but I'd like to pause here. 86% do not have legal representation, which makes them 5 times more likely to be denied, regardless of how valid their case is. So that's why we built Formally. And what we do is we take these forms and we make them easy. We provide a question flow that makes sense. We ask you for your name first, and then everything else. And for tricky questions like this one, that actually looks innocuous, right? Are you fluent in English? Like, yeah, kind of. Does it help me? What really this question is asking is, are you willing to give up your right to have an interpreter present during your court proceedings? That's a different question. So formally make sure that you have the context necessary to understand what the question is really getting at. And for those who are not fluent in English, we provide translations into Arabic, Spanish, Mandarin, and many other languages. And what has been a 4-hour process for lawyers, as they go back and forth with an applicant filling out a form, who often doesn't have all the information necessary, we can cut the lawyer time to about an hour, which is amazing. And also, people get an agency because they now know what the form is saying. They ask better questions when they meet with their attorney. And also the attorney can spend more time actually connecting with the clients instead of getting at what is your child's 3rd school address, like obscure information. So yeah, that's us. That's what we do. Happy to answer any questions later.
So thank you, Amelie. To give you all a little sense of how the night is going to progress, I'm going to have the panelists introduce themselves now, and then we're going to have about a 30-minute panel discussion. Then we're going to have 30 minutes for audience Q&A. And there will be a phone number that you can text your questions to. I'll get them up here, and we'll filter through those, and we'll ask those in the last 30 minutes. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our panelists and start with David.
Hey, everybody. I'm David Wang. I am Corporate Strategic Innovation Counsel for Wilson Sonsini. In English, that means I am head of innovation for the firm. For those that you don't know us, we're the largest law firm in Silicon Valley, and we represent kind of the likes of Google, Twitter, LinkedIn, et cetera. So very excited to be here with you guys today. I believe I am representing the people that are supposed to be killed. So I will do my best to defend our honor up here.
Hi, I'm Amelie. I feel like you know what I do. I'm the founder and CEO formally.
I'm Dan Jansen. I'm managing director of NextLaw Ventures. We're, we believe, the first legal tech-focused venture fund, early stage focus. Our first fund has 10 companies in it. We had a single limited partner, in that case was Denton's. It's working pretty well. That's not a forward-looking statement. And we're raising a second larger fund that Denton's is anchoring, and we're bringing in other strategic investors. And we hope to have 20 early stage legal tech companies in that fund as well.
We'll talk.
And, oh, I know where to find you. And something I often say, I am not a lawyer, I'm a serial entrepreneur, and I worked in, I ran a media practice for Boston Consulting Group. And so this was a chance to kind of combine entrepreneurship and professional services in an industry that I think is ready and ripe for disruption.
Great. Hi, folks. I'm Patrick Berry. I'm the COO of a company called Logikcull. We are a software company that is democratizing discovery. E-discovery is one of the biggest categories in legal software today, about a $10 billion industry. It's been the province of really big firms, really well-heeled companies. It's basically advanced technology that helps you find the smoking gun in a litigation. And our mission is to democratize discovery by bringing the best technology to anybody who needs it and level the playing field. I'm a lifelong Silicon Valley resident and started my career off as a lawyer at Wilson Sonsini, and now I'm a tech executive. It's good to be here.
Didn't kill you.
All right, so I'm going to start asking some questions, and I hope that we can just have a dialogue up here, so please feel free to jump in and get in each other's faces and defend the honor of the attorneys that they're trying to kill. So with that, Patrick, my first question is going to be to you. I know that Logikcull has been around for 15 plus years now, so it's a great granddaddy in the field of legal tech. The question is a two-part question. Number one is, how many lawyers have you killed? And do you feel bad about it?
Yeah, right. I think lawyers are working hard at getting themselves killed by working long hours. It's one of the reasons I got out of it and got into tech. It was oddly an easier path than working at Wilson Sonsini in terms of a lifestyle. So lawyers are working on it themselves. The practice of law is, as any of the lawyers know here, is represents a pretty diverse set of activities. And very often we feel sometimes more like a priest or a counselor than we do a legal technician. And I think there are aspects of the profession that aren't going anywhere. But clearly disruption is upon the profession, and it's a good thing. It's one of the last fields to really experience the benefits and challenges that software eating the world represents. And so it's interesting to observe it, but I don't think the profession's going anywhere.
So can you tell us a little bit about how Logikcull has disrupted the field, and what are lawyers doing now that they didn't do before?
Yeah, well, e-discovery is a highly technical field. It basically, as data is exploding in this world, as we all know, we're generating individually more data in a day than civilization generated in 1,000 years, in not too distant past. That data compounds, and when it comes to litigation or disputes, we want to get at that information in a reasonable way. And over the last 10 years or so, this e-discovery industry has evolved to enable lawyers to sift through mountains of data and get at relevant evidence. But the rate of the explosion of data has far outpaced lawyers' ability to get to the truth. And so a whole set of tools has emerged, and Logikcull and many other companies have participated in an escalating arms race where technology is applied to giant reams of data. Our goal is to simplify that process and break it down using cloud technologies and really good design principles and good pricing and other disruptive approaches to allow a mom and pop shop or an individual lawyer to use really advanced technologies to get justice for their client. It also works for very large firms and for the biggest companies in the world. But we're really trying to bring technology to level the playing field.
So I started my career as a lawyer at Sidley Austin, one of tonight's sponsors, and the first couple years I did document review. That was my life. And I have a feeling that doesn't exist for first-year associates now. So I guess the question I have, and maybe it's David, this is for you, is artificial intelligence coming into the legal profession an existential threat, especially for young lawyers?
If you ask the young lawyers, they would say yes, right? The question that I get asked more than any other, especially from our young attorneys, is some version of a joke, like, "Oh, David, are you here to replace me with a robot?" And I always say yes, because it's kind of true. But we have our largest summer class ever this year, and we are one of the firms that probably use technology the most of anybody. And so, the way that we think about it is, it's not like there's going to be a Terminator that comes to your desk and sits down and responds to your emails and do all the things that you're going to do. What it really is if you think about all the work that all the lawyers do in aggregate, and you divide them into specific subtypes, right? The more repetitive, what I think someone called intellectual manual labor, right? that element of it will be displaced more and more as time goes on. And so in the entire industry in the aggregate, all of that work still needs to be done. The aggregate amount of work that's available is actually expanding, right? And if you look at legal spend in legal departments, it's actually going up. So there's actually a bigger pie to account for it because of what Patrick mentioned is the more data is being generated, there's actually more litigation, there's more stuff to do. So from our perspective, our job is to make sure we capture a bigger piece of that pie. Yeah. And so for those 92 incoming summer associates, to replace the part that they do that's the intellectual manual labor, and to take all of those Stanford Law and Harvard Law graduates that we hire and put them to better use.
Do big law firms see themselves as competing with these legal tech companies that are employing AI, or are they adopting these technologies?
It depends on the angle of approach for the company. I was at an event just last night, actually, the Financial Times Digital Innovation / Disruption, something like that, all the words mixed together. But I think one of the founders there was an AI legal company, and then he joked about, law firms were coming to take your lunch, right? And so some, depending on the business model, because there's a lot of different ways that you can apply AI, right? Depending on the business models, there are companies out there that explicitly will say they are going to replace us. You interface with us instead, right, of a law firm, and we'll do the work, and we'll use AI to do it. But there's also a lot of other companies that are selling to us, to law firms, or selling to in-house departments, or selling directly to the consumer. So there's kind of a mix. So I would say, yeah, they are competitors, but and nobody has figured out yet, thankfully.
One thing, I think it's actually a slightly different dynamic. The rise of tech, AI enabled and other things, is actually creating a different kind of division. It's between the lawyer and their client. Because the client, in many cases a corporation, some company, business, now can see behind the curtain a little bit in terms of that manual labor, which was previously pretty obfuscated. And now with technology, it's possible to get more transparency into what's actually happening. And the companies are saying, hey, wait, we can do this. Why are you keeping that business inside the walls of the law firm? And we can take some of it. I think that's an emerging dynamic.
Well, if I could pile in, I always find these ominous undertones of the robots replacing your jobs. It may be in our children's lifetime, but in the closer end, I always tell people, you're not getting a pink slip, you're getting a promotion. Because let's be honest, there are parts of a lawyer's job, David was being kind, that aren't very fun. They're drudgery. They're staying up all night trying to find the assignment clause in the 100 leases that you're under your deal, or chasing signatures, or assembling deal folders, or generating closing books. The machines can do all of that better than a human can. But when you read those 100 leases, the machine is going to say, hey, young lawyer, these 80 are identical. You don't have to read them all. These 10 have minor differences, check them out, and these last handful are really off, have weird stuff going on. So young lawyer, you'll have a much more fulfilling job working on those interesting ones that are really represent important issues than you will have staying up all night reading 100 of those leases. So I speak at law schools occasionally, and I always say, I think there's no better time to be a young lawyer. The drudgery is going down. The technology is doing more of it for you. It's human plus machine is better than human or machine. You can go big law. They're hiring a bunch of folks. You can go to one of the 1,500 legal tech companies that exist in the world and have a cool entrepreneurial career. And you can be the lawyer or you can be the business person. Great time to be a lawyer.
So I think that's a great point, especially the man and machine working together. I worked with a startup last year who described AI as not artificial intelligence, but augmented intelligence. And he was talking exactly about that. And I actually forgot to get back to this. In the example I had of LawGeeks and the competition with the lawyer, Tunji Williams, although LawGeeks software did everything in under a minute, in the competition, the CEO then had to go through, it was exactly what you're talking about. They had flagged some clauses, some were green, good to go, others were yellow, some were red. So he had to go through and look at those red and yellow ones. Right. And it took him about 18 minutes, which is still less than half the time it took the lawyer, but there still is room for humans to work in this space.
Right, and I think that, kind of following up on that discussion, from our perspective as outside counsel, right? I completely agree with the notion that if given where the technology is at now, if you're not delivering services at the level where that would be comparable to the person in-house doing that themselves with the software, then you're essentially delivering an inferior service, right? And that's kind of that's the thing that's underlying a lot of these changes, is because one of the value propositions of a massive law firm used to be that you just didn't have enough bodies to actually solve these problems. So we brought in a lot of bodies, right? We threw like 100 associates at this big litigation, right? But now with technology, AI, with the augmentation of kind of the intellectual manual labor element of it, you increasingly get people, a smaller team can now do that work. And so for the clients, the thought is, well, do I need that team to be at a law firm, or can I do that in-house?
And the other thing I think that we haven't talked about, I think we're assuming that lawyers mostly make contracts. I think that means we're assuming mostly corporate law. There's a lot of fields that need more lawyers for people who are representing clients in courts. Immigration is one of those fields. And I think what technology can do there is increase the connection that the attorney has, right? Instead of being worried, oh, I only have an hour with you, and we also need to fill out the form, and we also need to go through these clauses. Hopefully that information can be made accessible so that the time spent face-to-face with your client is actually spent connecting and asking hard questions that maybe machines are not so good at getting good answers.
Yeah.
If I could just pile on that, I think the B2C legal services gap that you're addressing is huge, right? And it's awesome what you're doing. I would argue there's also a B2B legal services gap. Like, we've invested in a couple of smart contracting companies, and they have large corporate clients where over half of the contracts or agreements signed by the business people in the organization are not reviewed by a lawyer. Why? Because, it's the same one as last year, it didn't change much, or it takes too long, or they're going to charge me, or that's where good ideas go to die in a legal department. And so there's a legal services gap in the B2B world as well that technology is starting to address. And a client of one of our companies sent all their contracts through the machine, and they're right, 90+% of them were fine, but almost 10% of them weren't, right? And now more law is getting done, risk is being reduced.
Yeah. Following up on that, you're talking some about the opportunities. I'm wondering where the opportunities are in AI. I talked about some of the use cases. I'm sure I didn't hit them all. Where do you see the real opportunities for companies to come in and employ this technology?
So I think from our perspective, and I agree, obviously being a big corporate law firm, we have a particular slant in this, but I personally think it's in contracts. I don't think it's a coincidence that there is so many companies trying to apply AI to contracts, because NLP is actually fairly challenging, as anybody that works in AI and NLP field knows. But the funny thing about it is, in a legal context, lawyers have actually been trying for hundreds, if not thousands of years, to standardize the language in contracts, to make them easier to understand, more similar to each other, more logical, more standard, right? So actually, it's like a little bit of that. I don't know if you guys follow the self-driving car versus self-driving truck debate, right? So I think of contract analytics in legal AI as it's the self-driving truck equivalent in this field, because it's the same problem of NLP that you're trying to understand. I think Logikcull, they're doing something much harder, right? Because e-discovery, you got emails, you got all sorts of different formats, natural language, people talking like normal, right? But in contracts, I'm explicitly trying to say party A and party B agrees to C, and then we will do D if these following E, B conditions are met, right? And so it's the easier thing to do, and that's one of the reasons why one of our first AI investments was in the contract analytics space, because we think there's a lot of promises there.
I think it's really, I meet with a lot of general counsels in this role, 30 plus in the last couple of years. And one of them said, I want to get some AI. I said,
put some AI on it.
Yeah.
Throw some AI in there.
And that's what that silly Jeopardy show years ago made people think AI is a big box with the blinking blue light that answers trivia questions that you plug in. And you have to explain it. The operative word in AI machine learning is learning, right? And so you come back to what are the pain points, what are the frustrations, what are the unmet needs in the legal process workflow, and is AI relevant? Large amounts of structured, unstructured data, it's searching, filtering, prioritizing, and a lot of pain points in the practice of law aren't appropriate for AI. So I always go, let's go back to first principles and talk about the problem we're trying to solve and see if the technology is appropriate. And in the case of AI, you often have to train that in the machine to get up to the point where it can reliably.
You need petabytes of data. That's why document review and e-discovery is probably the best place to see what's happening in terms of the emergence of AI, in its most basic form. Things like predictive coding, technology-assisted review, these are standard concepts within e-discovery. It's because we have massive litigation, product liability, the opioid litigation that's happening right now has generated petabytes of information that involve communications between suppliers and distributors and users of opioids, and resulting in massive high-stakes bet-the-company litigation. No expense is being spared to understand the content of that data within limited timeframes. And so massive computing resources being trained through the repeated exposure to massive amounts of data is resulting in AI-like functionality. It is easy to overstate really where the industry is in that because it's really just assisting human reviewers in many cases, looking at duplication or near duplication, and then identifying things that are likely should be coded by a lawyer in one way versus another as privileged or non-privileged or somehow related to a given subject matter. It's probably the best laboratory we have right now in terms of legal tech for AI, but it's still fairly early days.
Yeah, and
the other thing, I think people like to use AI because it's a hot term. People are like, oh, is your company an AI company? I'm like, yeah, like we're using a Google Translate API to translate answers back. I could say that's an AI, but do I really want to? Like, does everything need to be AI and blockchain? Like, no. The answer is no. And the other answer is like, not everything is good for an AI, right? Like they're really stupid in a lot of ways, right? Like you can't actually ask them good questions a lot of the time. You have to ask them a very specific question that it has previously learned and can recognize, right? So I think like recognizing that AIs are also just like computer programs that can do some things really well and some things like not so well. We tried to like make a chat bot for asylum questions. It's a terrible idea. Like they ask you like, how can I like file my application? It's like, well, if you are being deported, and you're like, no, like, what are you saying, right? I don't know. I just want to like push back against the whole like AI is the scary
is AI becoming a buzzword? Have you seen, and maybe Dan, you're the best to answer this, are companies coming and pitching to you and just slapping some AI on it and saying?
Yeah. I mean, and to your point, if this is a baseball game that's not on tonight, we're in the second inning of AI. It's still very early days. Though AI's been around for decades, right? That's another thing people don't realize. The buzzword gets a lot of people excited. A lot of the AI solutions I've seen don't have meaningful AI in them, and maybe they don't need it, right? But on the hype curve, we're maxing out. Blockchain is catching up fast on the hype curve, but still early days.
Yeah, I think the thing that I always say internally is, people, again, we have very standard jokes because we're lawyers and we're terrible at comedy. But, they're like, oh, David, bring us into the 21st century, right? And I always say, like, let's get to the 20th century first, right? Because us as an industry we're in the 19th century. It's really kind of a, artisanal, this is an artisanally crafted contract that's handmade, fully organic.
You sound like a hipster.
Gluten-free, right?
It's a gluten-free contract.
Right. I mean, just doing the work of design, mechanization, and digitization like you guys are doing it formally, that is already a whole century ahead of what a lot of lawyers are actually doing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, the question is, why is it taking so damn long for AI to participate in this industry and other kind of forms of innovation, technical innovation?
Yeah, and I'm kind of surprised to hear that coming from you because in a firm, you're billing by the hour usually. So you have the incentive to be as artisanal as you can be, right? You want to go in and make sure everything is just perfect, exact, and twee. And,
a little sprig of mint on top.
Yeah, totally. Put a bird on it. Is your firm pushing against that? Are you finding new ways to handle billing arrangements?
So I think this is an interesting question. So because There is a market price and market value for every single legal services that you deliver, even for a firm like ours, where like at the top end of the majority of our work, it's fairly price insensitive. But there's always the lawyer resistance of, oh, I'm billing by the hour. It's a great deal, right? I just charge what it costs. But the question I always ask to my partners, especially the ones that are particularly proud of the, $30 million bill that they just sent out for God knows however many hours that was billed for it. And they're like, we just sent this bill out at $30 million and then we got paid on the whole thing. And I'm like, wow, that's really impressive. Do you realize you undercharged for that service? Right? Because, our clients often push back on our bills. Mm-hmm. And when they don't push back on 30 million, I'm like, actually, I think we should have charged them 50 million. Right? But, I mean, I'm not saying that, by the way. We're very happy whoever paid the 30 million. Right? But that's, people don't think about that, right? They're like, oh, I charged the full bill. Yeah. But actually, it's just that we're really behind other industries in actually pricing to value on our services, right?
Well, you're also behind the curtain. I mean, the profession is protected as a profession. And the rules that we have in place about the practice of law provide a lot of create a black box in many ways. And companies pay it because they treat it as an extraordinary expense, not an operating expense. And so it's an interesting wall that exists that we'll see how long that lasts in its current form. But technology tends to break walls down. And that I think that's coming ultimately for the lawyers.
I think lawyers can choose what they charge. I know immigration attorneys tend to actually charge per case. And I think technology would allow them to do. Immigration attorneys are not the best paid. They're not getting $20 million checks. What it allows them to do is either undercut prices or offer their services more affordably. And you know what? A lot of people need legal services, and they're currently not able to afford them. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, and I don't think lawyers are bound by a certain business model. They can freely choose on how they'd like to bill, and if they'd like to spend that extra hour talking to their client, they should absolutely do it. But I don't think that tech is taking that away from law firms.
Yeah, there's nothing in the model rules that says you have to bill by the hour.
Right.
Well, one thing I would observe is who's driving the change here. We looked at our deal flow, 300 companies, we picked 10. 80% of those companies were targeting the corporate legal departments, as opposed to law firms. Because that general counsel is under extreme pressure because legal spend as a percent of revenue, I talked about this before with some folks, is growing. And it's one of the few items that's growing on corporate P&Ls. So that CFO and the CEO are beating on that general counsel, and she's responding by adding tools and technologies that can do faster, cheaper, better, by adding legal ops functions that run the legal department like a business, procurement processes, KPIs, dashboards. And so if I walk into a large law firm and try to convince a room full of partners who are all millionaires that the world's ending, they look at me funny. If I go into a corporate legal department, that GC, it often resonates very quickly, and lawyers are incredibly good at responding to their clients. And if it's bet the company kind of stuff, they'll pay. They're not price sensitive, but a lot of the corporate legal work maybe isn't bet the company. And when that general counsel asks their outside law firm to innovate or adopt certain tools and technologies, or better yet, the law firms like Wilson bring the tools and technologies to their clients because they know that GC's under that kind of pressure. That really helps, drive change and drive adoption.
Yeah, and it comes down to the value thing, right? Because it's and this dynamic, I agree, exists between us and legal tech companies and us and in-house departments, and we're very cognizant of it. And it's, when people talk about innovation and efficiency, what they often mean is, I want to pay less for the same amount of services, which is fine, right? But if I look at the overall value of a thing, for example, if we can bring some solution that brings additional risk management and kind of compliance mitigation value that's above and beyond what we're charging now, we've actually found that clients are fairly happy to increase their share of the spend with us to get more value as opposed to getting that service from somewhere else. And that's really kind of where we're planning to go, right, is to meet that challenge head on. Because I completely agree. Just by hiding behind the curtain, that's not gonna last, right? So it's really, you got to get ahead of the curve.
I'm curious, following up on what you were talking about, Dan, if I'm starting a legal tech company, who should I be trying to sell to? It sounds like I'm not going to the law firm. I'm trying to put pressure on the law firm through its clients, but where should I go?
Well, one, I mean, make sure you get a large addressable market, because I can't count the pitches I've had that are in some obscure corner of the law, which just isn't scalable. But I would argue that there are certain law firms, the ones who get this and are in embracing these tools and technologies, are winning more competitive pitch situations. They're growing their share of wallet. So there is a segment of the law firm market that is very attractive. But large portions of law firm, and this is big law all the way down to the one-person shops, are risk averse and are not as likely to adopt. And I think targeting that general counsel who's under that extreme pressure to do it faster, cheaper, better is often not a bad place to start. And I know we're talking about the B2B market, but that's kind of where we focus. There's a lot
We're
of
also B2B.
Oh, you are? Oh, of course.
B2B.
Yeah, you're right, because you're B2B to C, right? Yeah.
Unfortunately, legal departments have the lowest rate of technology spend of any department in a company.
Right. Yeah, no, then that's a problem, because I always try to get people to understand, why is software and SaaS different in the legal vertical versus other verticals? And it's one, the law firms, for example, spend less than 1% of revenue against innovation and innovative technologies, and I'm not talking IT spend. That compares to like 13% in pharmaceuticals, even 5% in other professional services. So the law firms are, and there's reasons why, this annual budget cycle, this bill, collect, pay it all out, start over again every year cycle hurts the law firms. The corporate legal departments are fighting for that IT spend, and to your point, if somebody who's driving revenue puts a pitch for some technology spend, they're probably going to get it over to the legal department.
Yeah.
But you tell me,
The legal departments are really underfunded in terms of their technology spend, as against any of the other departments, finance or marketing or sales, that have very healthy technology spends. But the legal departments across the board spend a fraction, less than half of what those other departments spend in terms of IT. But there's a lot is changing now. People are starting to focus on the legal market. As we've remarked, there's been a lot of investment there. Technologies are changing, and there's a lot of money to be saved in legal spend. It's one of the biggest line items that can be addressed. So here's hoping.
But also, when I talk to our potential clients, they say that software is like janky and also really expensive, right? Like, you say there's a small IT budget, but like most legal software runs at like hundreds of thousands of dollars a year for a large firm, Like, they get really, really expensive and really pricey, and there really hasn't been like startup-like innovation that like does lightweight solutions, right? And the other thing is that switching costs are so high, right? People are like, why aren't you building formally as a case management software? Well, you know what? Case management software is out there. Actually, people really hate it. It's not really good. But also, your law firm's not going to just go switch their case management software because my software looks a little prettier. Like, that's not going to happen. So I think...
How pretty?
Right, exactly.
But Patrick made a point I hope the entrepreneurs in the audience really listen to, which is part of your pitch, if it's to a corporate legal department or a law firm, has to be ROI driven, right? It just can't be, check out my cool demo. Is what efficiencies is this going to create? What incremental revenue is it going to help find? One of my favorite general counsels I met with last year was a global fashion brand industry. And she said, I'm using technology to become profitable. And I've never heard a GC say that. She goes, I am profitable. She used to chase the companies that infringed her brands and just shut them down. Now she's suing the heck out of them, and she's got some technology in place that allows her to be net profitable to the corporation, and the CFO listens to that.
So I'm curious, in that company, maybe you don't know, you talked about legal ops becoming more prevalent as a business process, essentially. Did they have that in place? Is she just taking it on herself to do that?
This woman was impressive and did it herself, but legal ops is one of the most fast-growing phenomena. I mean, if you County Brenton down here in the Bay Area is the one who kind of got it going, got CLOC going, Corporate Legal Operations Consortium. And we sponsored their first conference. I think they had 200 people at it. The last one in Vegas had to have 3,000-4,000. I mean, it's becoming a global phenomenon. And our view is, as an investor, they are our friends. You know, faster, better, cheaper is kind of the motto of legal ops. And they can really help the software companies want to pitch to them.
Yeah. So we've had this explosion in funding. How much of that is actually changing the day-to-day work that a lawyer does? Are we seeing many of these tools employed?
I think probably it's changing more than what lawyers are seeing, because my sense of it is that most lawyers don't see a change, and it's part of this, you know, frog boiling in water in situation. Because if you look at the larger trends in the industry, it's very clear, and they put out this report, my alma mater and Thomson Reuters and Georgetown puts out this report every year in the legal industry, and then you look at the spend, right? Overall, the legal spend is going up. In law firms, it's kind of relatively flat, right? And then, you know, we had a banner year this year. It's the best year ever, and I suspect a lot of the other elite firms have also done well. But, you know, we could be doing even better. And so you really, on the edges, the work is, you know, disappearing or moving to other service providers or legal tech companies where people are bringing it in-house. But, you know, lawyers can, for years and years and years, still do the same thing that they do. And just because of how big the market is and how fragmented it is, there's not visible impact. I suspect it's kind of different in mid-tier law and small law firms, but, you know, I don't have direct experience with that. In danger of mixing my metaphors here, you talked about being a frog boiling in water. Is there going to be a tipping point where the frog's like, oh crap, what has happened? My job has totally changed and I'm not prepared for this? Theoretically, yes. It's hard for me to see from where I'm sitting that happening anytime soon, just because there's you know, the technology is not there yet, right? I mean, I think the technology is there for a lot of, like, people both over and underestimate, like, the impact, right? Like, they, you know, inside law firm world, and when I talk to other people kind of in my role and as well as partners in my firm and other firms, they generally fall into the two camps. Either, like, they buy into the hype and they say, like, oh, it's tomorrow, or they're like, never, right? But it's really kind of, there's a lot of stuff, document automation, like process digitization, a lot of that stuff could be a lot further along. But on the higher end of the stuff, there's people saying, oh, you can AI this, AI that. That's not anywhere near kind of production level, right? So it's kind of this duality of conflicting signals, which is why it's so confusing and people don't have clear enough signals to truly move forward in a kind of sea change type of way yet.
Unfortunately,
If they
I
use
think
AI as a verb, not trust them.
But unfortunately, what I think, and you'll probably agree with this, Amelie, is like the people who get left behind are the ones at the edges, the margins, the very small firms, the folks in rural areas who are trying to help their community or their clients, and technology passes them by more quickly. There's a digital divide or what have you that it passes them by more quickly, and so the power and the advantage is mostly gained by the larger firms and corporations who can take advantage of the technology.
So I think that's definitely true, but there's also, tons of studies that talk about there being lawyer deserts, right? You go to rural counties and it's not like being here where you walk down the street and bump into 5 lawyers in 2 blocks, right? So I do think that there is some promise that this technology, what you're doing, democratizing discovery, can go out to those same places and make a difference. That's the goal.
The other thing is that buying legal services is really hard. So, like, the buying experience is really broken, right? So if I'm like, oh, I could use an attorney, you're like, what kind of attorney? I don't really know. If you don't have legal training and then you call up your friend and you're like, hey Bob, do you know a good immigration attorney? And they're like, yeah, I once met one in law school. And it's not a good buying experience for somebody who's looking for help, right? Yeah. It's hard to find where to start. It's hard to find somebody who's competent. You don't know how competent they are. You don't know how much it's going to cost, right? It's not like lawyers have their rates up online. It's just the whole consumer side is so unfriendly and not accessible to people who could really use those services.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And that goes back to a point that Jason made in the beginning where he's talking about the access to justice gap. and he mentioned, I think it was about 80% of Americans don't have access to justice, and part of that is exactly what you're talking about. If, they have, they're in an apartment and their landlord is threatening to evict them, they want somebody to look at their lease, but they don't know how to find a lawyer because they don't have the network, or they don't think they have the money to do it. So some of the changes that are coming around in Utah and in California are going to be addressing that. And the other thing with the network, I don't know if you guys know this, only lawyers can take a referral fee for passing on work to another lawyer. So you as a business person, if you're not a lawyer, if you as a company refer something out, you can't take a piece of that. That's fee sharing and it's illegal. That's one of the rules that the California bar is thinking about changing. I'm curious if you guys have any thoughts on these regulatory reforms that are coming around.
Well, I think there's both this is kind of coming back now, to the law schools, right? There's both an oversupply and an undersupply of lawyers, right? And so there's a massive oversupply of lawyers that want to work at Wilson Sonsini. There is we have a lot of applicants, right? Very qualified, but there's a massive undersupply of lawyers overall in the country, right? And that's what creates the access to justice gap. But your average law student, I don't even know how much it is now, but even when I went through law school, it was like hundreds of thousands of dollars in tuition and board. And so, I think that really the only way, and this might not even have to do with technology, the only way that you can address that without kind of some dramatic, I can't imagine even what kind of change that would be, coming to the legal education system where people are not putting 4 years of college plus 3 years of law school costs, deferred comp, loan interest on top, right? And to come in to be a lawyer. If you just had companies that were able to produce law services, you would address that problem. That might not even involve that much technology.
I think the way I see it is, again, the collaboration between the right? Because coming back to what the way I understand AI is, computers are really good at doing some things really fast and really well a lot of times, right? But they're really bad at doing some things that humans are really good at, like answering questions or holding conversations or, being personable and nuanced. They're not really good at being nuanced usually. So I think the way I see this playing out, and I think the task force was a good start. We had an info session. I think it was an interesting start, but it wasn't really executed in a way that was credible to attorneys and conveying this message, hey, really there's room for collaboration between attorneys and machines. Rather, it was this sense of, oh, are we just telling everyone you can pay $30 for an app and skip the lawyer, right? So I think saying, oh, you really do need a lawyer for some specific parts of your case. You need somebody to represent you in court, or you need somebody to prepare your statement with you, but you probably can get some help on some of the paperwork, right? Or, anyways, I guess what I'm saying is it shouldn't be either no attorney or $20,000 worth of attorney. It might just be in between a collaboration that democratizes it for the smaller firms and just gets more people to lawyers because a lot of people need them. I keep saying that, but it's just...
A lot of people need good advice.
They do.
And, technology has disrupted every industry. We've seen it happen over the last 10 years. Name the vertical, and it's been fundamentally disrupted with travel, entertainment, retail, media. They've all been knocked down one after the other. Legal has resisted it in part because of the... great, thank you. In part because of the professional standards, and a lot of that is a good thing. But we'll see. We'll see how long that lasts.
One thing on the regulatory changes, I appreciate that this is a U.S. audience. Our investment focus is North America, UK, and a little bit of Europe. But it's really important to see that while the U.S. is the largest legal market in the world by far, with all due respect, it's not necessarily the most innovative. We're seeing some things out of Canada, the AI, speaking of AI, around the University of Toronto, and we have 3 companies we've invested out of Canada. One of it's Ross Intelligence, was mentioned before, that's now here. We're seeing some cool stuff there. The UK is probably one of the most competitive legal tech markets in the world. Their regulatory restrictions are less. LegalZoom bought a law firm in the UK. Some markets you can bring in law firms can go public and access capital markets in a much simpler and faster way. So even if you only operate in the U.S., I think it's useful to kind of keep a little bit of an eye on some of the regulatory changes we're seeing in other leading markets, because those could be coming our way at some point as well.
Yep. Absolutely.
So, yeah, I'm going to ask one more question to the panel, and then we'll get to the audience questions. So if you have a question, you can still get it in up there, 650-308-8522. The question I wanted to ask, though, is, we've talked a lot about the promise of AI when it comes to providing legal services. Talked a little bit about the downside in the sense of, is it going to be bad for lawyers? Is it going to be bad for law firm economics? What are the other downsides, though? What are potential downsides? Why are some people concerned about this for the consumer?
I think there is some scary questions about bias that is being woven into technologies. And I'm phrasing it like that because it's not this magical black box that the AI is this bias thing that spits out something completely crazy. It's that humans are building it, and it's mostly young software engineers. They're mostly probably between 20 and 30 something, and they're probably mostly male and probably mostly white, and they're probably building a lot of biases into these technologies, and we know this because we see the data. So I think the risk that we're running is saying, oh, this is a technology, doesn't have bias, forgetting that, yes, technically doesn't, but it has the bias of the people who built it or who gave it data. So I think thinking critically about what sort of data we are giving to these technologies, especially if they're going to make judgments, such as the Compass software, which was evaluating someone's likelihood of reoffense, for instance, which was really racially biased and also really sexist. We just have to be critical about what sort of data we are giving these technologies so that we can balance against it or just be aware of it and know that the results are going to be as biased as the data.
It's funny, you mentioned the Compass one. This literally came up in a kind of very recent conversation. A friend of mine...
Sorry, can we just explain what the Compass case is so folks here know what it is?
Yeah. You can go for it.
So basically, in the United States, there are many companies, Compass being the biggest one, I think, right, by market share, that are using predictive analytics and big data AI to give sentencing guidelines, to basically recommend to courts how long someone's sentence should be, and then for bail, whether someone should get bail or not based on kind of the circumstances of their case. Actually a lot of work has gone into explainable AI in this area. And so a friend of mine who's a GC at one of the largest New York City kind of service providers, pro bono organizations, they actually did this big project to try to basically explain why the software were making these predictions. Mm-hmm. But the interesting thing is, I think there's a tendency, it's like Facebook, right? There's a tendency to blame the algorithm for these things, and it's the algorithm, the programming has a bias. But I think we should all ask ourselves, how much is just, because the algorithm really it just looks at the data set, and really it replicates the results that it sees from the data. So, personally, I think there's a lot of it where it's kind of just holding up a mirror to the justice system,
So would you say that Compass and other companies like that should make their algorithms public so we can actually see what's happening in that black box?
I don't know. Do you think they know?
Well, they should at least have somebody be able to look at it who can evaluate it, who is hopefully somebody who has users' best interests in mind.
I honestly don't think that companies like Compass and a lot of these companies that rely on deep learning, I don't think they can even explain it themselves exactly why it makes the decisions that it does. I think that's part of the problem.
So I think that's true, but they also are keeping the trade secret and not letting anybody see what's actually going into making those decisions.
Well, they don't have to make it public, right? I think that would be ideal. I would actually kind of love that, but I think having some more transparency, what data did you use? If you write a research paper, you have to write your methods into it, right? You have to be we use this data, and this is N for females, N for males. There should be a methodology section for algorithms, I think, roughly what did you do, at least for regulators, not necessarily for the general public.
Yeah, you could argue that's a due process violation.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to turn to audience questions now, and the first one for David and Dan. is there any demand or value to create a unifying legal software platform? This could unite the many emerging legal tech vendors.
Oh, this is one of my favorites. Our investment thesis is that this proliferation of companies, 1,500 plus, is not sustainable. And so we're going to have a phase like any disruptive cycle where a lot of the companies are going to start failing. We're going to start seeing roll-ups. We're going to start seeing consolidations because the average law firm or corporate legal department can't work with 200 legal tech vendors.
Right.
And all the other corporate functions in major companies, Salesforce.com for sales and marketing and ADP for the HR department and who is it, Adobe, I think, or for finance. That doesn't exist yet for legal, but it's coming. And so we think like Elevate acquired 7 legal tech companies last year. Rain in Court is trying to become the legal tech platform, the app store for legal tech. There's a lot of challenges, and it's very early days, but we see a lot of those companies getting highly acquisitive of these early stage legal tech companies and trying to become the platform that can walk into David's law firm or a big corporate legal department and say, we have 60 solutions, behind one point sale.
Yeah.
Well, if you borrowed from some other things we've seen in technology where you get a platform that has a unifying or monopolistic even function, whether it's in social media or with Google with search, you're still looking for that one central use case that unifies all others. Whether it's it's the search use case or it's the connect with friends use case or the communicate for the WhatsApps of the world, that central unifying function that gets solved by the platform, it's not yet clear in legal tech, and perhaps that will emerge, but I think it's a little too early to say.
Yeah, I've argued that we're going from whack-a-mole legal tech to platform legal tech, and I gave a speech in Germany, and I don't think whack-a-mole translates, but my point was there's very specific point solutions that you put, problems that you put a point solution on, but again, you can't have 200 vendors. So what's the dominant use case? I don't know yet, but are some people starting to try to aggregate and become the platforms? Yep. Who's going to win? I don't know yet. As an investor, I love it because they're acquisitive of early stage legal tech companies. Maybe yours?
All right, this next question is going to be for Patrick. So we've talked about selling to law firms, selling to corporations, but there's also a need in the judicial system. They could use this tech as well. I think Logikcull might be able to work there. I don't know if you guys do, but what do you think about accelerating the judicial process and helping the legal system?
That's an interesting question. I mean, in the United States, we have an adversarial system, which means the judiciary is supposed to be essentially impartial, disinterested intermediary or judicial party, and so each party has to advocate for their own position using the data that's available. Sometimes it's an asymmetrical access to data, but that's the way our system works, and judges tend to not want to necessarily, they don't sift through the evidence on their own, the base level evidence to determine what's relevant. The parties have to articulate their position based upon available evidence. In other jurisdictions, it's different. In Europe, it's somewhat different. I think it's certainly the case that our court system, our judicial system, could benefit from technologies. Unfortunately, it's a government buyer, and it's an underfunded. We have shortages of judges and other personnel in the courts, and technology will likely be the last to arrive there, unfortunately. But that's the nature of our system. I wish I had a better answer.
For Amelie, can formally let governments add their own forms? So could you license the automation?
Oh my God. 2 stories. I would love if USCIS came up to us and was like, hey, can you make a really great accessible user interface for all our immigration forms? I suspect there's a reason they're kind of hard. But the Austrian government came up to me and was like, we talked about your software. So,
right.
maybe there is a potential here. And they buy it, we'd be happy to make all their forms.
That's interesting and great. And I'm curious for you 3 down on the end, how much of your sales are in the US versus international?
Vast majority is in the US. I give 90%. split between government customers, big governments like the city of New York, city of Chicago, city of Baltimore, city of San Jose, but also a split between law firms and then enterprises.
Oh, yeah, cities are really interested as well, and like municipalities especially. So there is a potential for government. It probably won't be USCIS. I hope. I mean, that would be great. Again, I'd love that so much.
All right, for Dan, what is the best legal tech pitch you've ever heard?
Not going to tell you because I invested. If you have trouble sleeping at night, let me know and I'll send you the presentation. Last week in London, I gave a presentation on what the VC is really thinking during your legal tech pitch. So let me paraphrase a few things from that, which is you got to grab them quick. You got to show a real pain point, a large addressable market, a solution that has a business model that's viable and credible, and tell me about the exit. And if you can do that in 30 seconds or less, that's a heck of a pitch. If you can't do that, I don't think, sorry to sound like a jerk here, but your thinking may not be crisp enough. I don't want to see your demo. I want you to answer those questions first, and if you answer those questions compellingly, all right, I got to believe your demo's going to be all right, or it's going to be something that we can get there. But if you can't answer those basic questions first, probably not compelling.
So 30 seconds is all they got.
What's that?
I'll show you my mark.
Okay. Looking forward to it.
Well, and I'm not going to ask what the worst is. I don't want you to put anybody on the spot, but...
Well, can I tell you my worst?
Oh, please,
I was an entrepreneur. No, it's actually my best. I should answer this. I was an entrepreneur pitching a VC, and I think most of them are kind of jerks, to be honest. The confidence is extraordinary in some cases. But the best VC pitch I ever had, I was pitching, I had a alternative advertising model. We sold branded virtual goods into social media. And I was pitching this VC, and I thought I was crushing it. I was 20 minutes in. I thought everything was going great. And the guy goes like this, right in my face, halfway through. And I go, what? He goes, time out. He goes, Dan, I'm not going to invest in your company. And I'm just like, oh. And we can do three things right now. We can, you can keep pitching. I'm not going to change my mind. We can give people their time back, and everybody appreciates that. Or you can tell me that I can give you clear, unvarnished feedback of what I really think. And if you can handle it, I'll take door number 3. Yeah. And I thought it was going to be the worst, but it turned out to be the best because I knew what the VC was really thinking, and I got really good advice. Session. And so if your pitch is going bad, maybe to say, hey, you're clearly not going to invest. Tell me what you really think. Because a lot of VCs, I've been the entrepreneur for most of my career. Hard to get a decision, right? It's like, well, that's interesting. Give me a call back and we'll talk about it. It's like, no, just tell me no and tell me why. It's not as good as a fast yes, but that's super helpful. So sorry, I got excited about the question.
Yeah, no, that's love it when you get excited.
Thanks.
All right, let's go to David for this one. One of the potential rule changes in California would allow non-attorney co-ownership of law firms. Do you think that's a good idea?
Yes.
All right. Why?
I think, again, this goes back to my earlier statement about the 19th century. The whole, medieval guild system, there's no reason for that, right? Any regulatory requirement that you have that you would need to put into kind of a bar system or kind of for lawyers, you could also impose on a company, right? I'm actually part of the American Bar Association kind of redrafting certain professional rules and responsibilities, that the entire effort with respect to innovation and legal technology. And I can tell you, just owning up completely to it, that it's going at a glacial pace, right? And then it's kind of this self-regulatory organization. It's not particularly focused. It's based on voluntary participation. If there were clear regulatory mandates and someone really thinking this through, from a public policy perspective, I don't see any reason why you cannot design rules that are just as good, that would permit participation by people that are other than lawyers that also still address and solve the fundamental issues that you would want to solve, like attorney-client representation and fiduciary duty. These things exist in all other industries. Like, they're not truly unique, right? Privilege, right? Conflicts of interest. You can regulate for all of those things. And personally, I would love to have more money to play around with.
Yeah.
Outside investors, sure. The Australian company law firms, right? They can go public, and all of a sudden now you have capital that you can invest in R&D and in other things.
Yeah. Dan, you were talking about the different regulatory schemes in Australia and the UK. Have we seen any benefits from that? What would be the upside if we let more money come into?
I think the benefits are significant. It's just your point. It's access to capital markets so that you can do multi-year investing kind of opportunities, and you can invest a higher percentage of revenue. I mean, we haven't talked about the Big Four yet, but Big Four accounting firms are some of the largest law firms in the world. They employ thousands of lawyers, and they have access, just given their sheer size, not necessarily just public markets, is significantly more capital, which is why they're investing close to 5% of their much larger revenue into innovative technologies. And they bring, tools and technology focus from their accounting, their tax, and their consulting businesses. They're bringing that into their legal business. So if law firms had the opportunity to access that kind of capital, it would be one way to counter a pretty significant threat.
Do you have a sense of what's happening like to the Magic Circle firms if PwC and Deloitte are also operating as law firms in the UK? Are they competing on equal footing there, or are they getting swallowed up?
I won't consider it equal footing. I mean, Denton's is the largest law firm in the world with 10,000 lawyers. That's a rounding error on Deloitte's employee base. They have hundreds of thousands of employees. But it's one way that access to capital markets. One of the challenges with large law firms, I've met with many of them, is they operate on a pretty rigid annual budget cycle, right? And they have a hard time making multi-year capital commitments and investment commitments. Some can, but a lot of them can't because they work, bill, collect, and pay it all out and start over. And that doesn't give you a multi-year time horizon on important projects.
Law firms are worried about it. U.S. law firms are really worried about it. About the Big Four and alternative legal service providers. And
they should be.
Yeah, they're exactly what you say. They're bringing technology, long-term thinking, and they should be.
What Big Four?
You're still alive. Still alive.
Looking to kill the lawyers still. All right, for Patrick, pre-conflict, can a company's regulatory compliance be monitored better using discovery tech?
Yeah, there's RegTech out there. That's a whole category of technology that is designed to ensure, allow management to monitor compliance and ensure compliance, regulatory compliance. And it's a high growth area with the emergence of all these privacy laws, not only in Europe with GDPR, but also locally in California, CCPA, and elsewhere. It's a growing area. Obviously, for many years we've had financial standards, Sarbanes-Oxley and others, where compliance has been a critical issue. And it's really well suited to technology because regulations are like software. They're code, and they can be interpreted by machines and written into software. And so there's a lot that's happening there, and there's a lot of promise.
I completely agree. We think regulatory, that area is actually a really fertile ground for investment. We have our own technology subsidiary, and their first product was CCPA oriented for privacy, right? And there, the way that we see the problem is you need expertise, a high level of expertise, but it's something that can be leveraged across kind of a fairly broad base. So it's kind of a perfect use case for technology, right? Where, for each individual scenario of compliance, there might be a lot of them, but there's probably a lot of repeats. So it's very easy for you to kind of leverage that in software and kind of expert systems. And so, you get some mileage out of that. And I think that's a promising area, but a lot of people are digging there right now.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if you can tell us more about your Director of Innovation at Wilson Sonsini. what is the law firm doing to innovate? I know you just hinted at it, or at least a bit of it, but how are you differentiating yourself from other law firms that you see as being back in the 19th century still?
So I think for us, and this is part of the DNA of the firm, being here in the Valley, it's a little bit different. I think, you have to go in it with some humility to know that, one, you're going to have to experiment, and innovation is kind of a trial and error process, and that, two, different problems require different solutions. So for us, we kind of have a bunch of different approaches, and we're trying to hit every single cylinder at the same time to see what works, and sometimes in combination with each other, right? So I mentioned kind of our fully owned subsidiary, who's kind of doing product work, right? Productizing our world-leading expertise, going out to a larger audience with specific products. We also, do our investments in legal technology companies, partner and work with them. We invested last year in like I mentioned before, a contract analytics company called Lexion. They're based in Seattle, spun out of AI2. And, we're kind of a minority investor in that company, still a fairly large check. And then internally, we partner with legal tech companies, bring them in, kind of augment our practices, have that augmented intelligence practice, and, with different tools that slot into different practice areas. And you have to kind of do that whole spectrum to really be in a good position. So when that market does shift, right, in a decisive way, that you'll be well positioned to be at the front end of it.
For all the panelists, but let's start with Amelie. How can legal technology shrink the justice gap?
I think I've talked about this a little bit. I think the most important way that I see it shrinking the justice gap is just, having lawyers spend less time on this manual labor, this manual intellectual labor that you talk about, and spend more time with clients, which hopefully will increase legal representation in the long run. I think in the short run, technology can provide Band-Aid solutions. I think that's how I see formally providing help for pro se cases, which we don't like. We don't want anyone to go through an asylum case by themselves, right? But in the meantime, making sure that at least they understand what their paperwork says in a language they can understand, weirdly goes a long way because we're so behind, right? So I think Band-Aid solutions in the short run, and in the long run, hopefully increased legal representation.
All right, on to the next question. And this one
You got it.
is for me. Thanks, whoever out there is thinking of me. I appreciate it. And it's, are law schools training students in legal tech? We understand that UC Hastings has an accelerator. That is true. So law schools, let me give you my quick spiel on how legal education is in the 19th century. Law school is 3 years. You really don't need your third year at all. Yet lawyers come out, they pass the bar, and they don't know what they're doing when they go into a law firm. The scariest week I ever had in my life was my first year in a law firm, because I spent 3 years and I didn't learn anything. It was all philosophical, pie-in-the-sky stuff. So number one, I think law schools really should be doing more experiential education. At UC Hastings, we have started a legal tech and innovation center. And as part of that, we're developing a curriculum that are giving students more hands-on experience. One of the challenges we have at Hastings, we're a standalone law school. So I can't go over to the engineering department and bring some folks over to work with our law students. So we've brought legal tech companies into our space, and our students are working with them. We are not totally unique in this. There's several law schools who have started these sort of legal tech programs. There's only one other accelerator program, and that's at Duke. But Suffolk is really innovative. Northwestern is innovative. Georgetown, there's a bunch of schools that are catching up and trying to get into the 21st century.
Stanford only has Codex.
As a Hastings Law School alum, I would just say I think it's great. I love that focus. Being in the heart of Silicon Valley, whether it's Stanford, Hastings, or Haas, or Cal, there should be more of a bringing together of the practical aspects of legal education, including technology. Technology is at the center of what lawyers are doing today. As much as they may hate the clunky tools that they're exposed to, that they're forced to work with, they rely on technology increasingly. You can't be a Silicon Valley lawyer, litigator, or corporate lawyer without having a good grasp of technology. Beyond just a layman's grasp. There's a lot of old school folks out there, Jack Russo, I know you're out there somewhere, that are old school lawyers that maybe don't know so much about technology, but now if you're a young lawyer, you need to. Law school should be accelerating that process so that we can give service and advice in a cost-effective way. I think it's great you guys are doing that.
This one I'm going to give to Dan. Dan, this question is, are there any apps out there that use AI to spot an issue or a subject matter, then route a potential client through forms like Formalese, and then hand them off to a lawyer to review it?
I'm sure there are.
Yeah.
I don't have a specific spot answer, but let me shamelessly plug one of our portfolio companies that kind of gets close to that. And you mentioned it before, Ross Intelligence. Because one of the pain points that corporate clients experience is they don't want to pay to train law firms' young associates. They ask a question and they expect the brilliant lawyer just to have the answer. What happens is the brilliant lawyer turns to a young associate, answers the question, and she goes away, or a paralegal comes back a week later with this beautiful 10-page memo with all the case law cited and the answer and a $5,000 invoice. What Ross did is it basically ingested the entire bolus of U.S. case law, used 20 law firms to train the machine to answer the questions to the point where the confidence intervals are high enough that you ask the machine the question in NLP, natural language processing, and the machine generates that memo in 10 minutes, or in a few minutes. Human plus machine, then the partner reviews the memo, tweaks it a little bit here and there, and sends it to the client. Yeah. No, but with a $2,000 bill, and faster, better, cheaper, right? But the reason I went there on this is then the machine remembers every question you ever asked it. In 6 months, there's a ruling in some district somewhere that relates to the question that was asked, and the machine pushes the notification, hey, you asked this question, this is relevant, highlighted the bit that's relevant, positive, negative, or neutral impact on your question. So the point was the machine, it's not, I know you asked about creating forms specifically, I didn't have a good answer to that, but this is an example where the machine's working in tandem with the human to generate a better answer faster, better, cheaper.
I'll give you a good answer.
Yeah.
This is the joke.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, one last question for each of our panelists, and that is, imagine the world 10 years out. What is one change that you would like to see in the provision of legal services?
Killing the billable hour.
Love it.
Cool.
Instead of the lawyer, kill the billable hour.
Yeah.
I don't know, breaking bureaucratic barriers. Bureaucracy should not be violent. It really should just do its job. Working towards that.
I would build on David's answer. I say kill the billable hour and replace it with SaaS revenue. Because from an enterprise valuation perspective, $1 of recurring revenue, MRR or ARR, is worth a lot more than a one-off billable hour. Both of them could be doing the exact same legal task, but this would be a much better revenue stream for law firms.
Spoken like a true VC.
Yes, make money while you're sleeping.
Yeah. I mean, I'm in the same line with that, which is basically some structural change around the profession. And it's less about the technical solutions and the, as much as it's kind of sexy to talk about AI and everything, it's really about structural change coming to the profession. It's still going to be possible to deliver advice, quality advice in an ethical way. But things like ownership in the billable hour, the vestiges of the guild system, it's probably time to start to take a fresh look at that.
Well, join me in thanking our panelists.